COVID, political extremism, inflation, the future of our democracy. With so much coming at us, it's hard to take it all in. Well, my dear friend Scott Galloway always has a unique way to explain what's going on. And in his new book, Adrift, America in 100 Charts, he looks at everything from the size of container ships to online dating to life expectancy, all to explain America today and, more importantly, where he thinks we're headed. Scott is a marketing professor at NYU and a co-host of the very successful podcast Pivot, and I am thrilled to have him here with us tonight. Scott, let's talk about this book. You give us a history lesson, right? 1945 until today, but not through traditional storytelling. It's all through charts. Why? To combat misinformation?
Well, it's just we've had the alphabet for about 1,500 years, but we've been interpreting images on cave walls or meeting people based on where the sun was in the sky. So we just absorb pictures 6 to 60 times faster than words. So people just get a problem when they see a chart much faster than when they see words.
So you write in the book that nations prosper or perish based on how they respond to crisis.
Absolutely.
COVID, how do we respond?
We're going to need a bigger boat. I think it's a mixed bag. First off, it demonstrates what's best and what's, I think, worst about America right now. The first is no one's lining up to get a Chinese or a Russian vaccine. The most important product of the last 50 years isn't the iPhone. It isn't the microprocessor. It's the vaccine. We would have lost another 1 to 2 million people without these vaccines. We have the best scientists. We have the best distribution. But at the same time, despite the fact that we had these vaccines, the polarization in our society meant a lot of people unnecessarily perished. And we also we politicize them, we're angry about them, and we don't celebrate the fact that the brightest people in the world all want to come here. We don't celebrate the fact that these vaccines were essentially government funded. And whether it's Moderna, Google, or Apple, we have a small group of people who are the most fortunate people in our nation, tech billionaires, who tend to be the first ones to sort of criticize the government, not acknowledging that every one of these big companies has built a layer of innovation on top of middle-class taxpayer investments that were very forward-looking.
That's where I want you to go, because when you talk about the greatest innovation, you don't actually say the vaccine. You don't say the smartphone or refrigeration. You say our greatest innovation is the middle class. Explain this to us.
Well, I agree with Peter Drucker, the economist in the 60s. The whole point of an economy is to create a middle class. They fight our wars, they pay our taxes, they're responsible for the majority of society's gains. And to a certain extent, the greatest, you could argue, one of the biggest accomplishments of the last 50 years is when you really want to explain China's relative ascendancy, it's that they have brought 500 million people into the middle class, whereas our middle class has declined. And that's the bad news. The good news is, just as we've attacked the middle class, we can rejuvenate it. There's this illusion of complexity that people who want to continue to cram more wealth in the top 1%, or tech, who claim they can't solve these complicated problems around polarization or election misinformation, we can absolutely undo these problems. With one small child tax credit, we reduced childhood poverty by 50%.
And then we got rid of that child tax credit. Let's remind our audience.
And then we struck it.
But are you being sort of overly romantic when you think about that American middle class of the 1950s and 1960s? Because it was all well and good for June and Ward Cleaver, but it left out all sorts of Americans.
Yeah, the heteronormative view that we associate with the middle class no longer makes sense, right? Only a quarter of America is the traditional heteronormative household. But at the same time, a middle-class household that has a compact with America that their kids will do better than them always happened until the last 5 years. For the first time in our history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at the age of 30. And at the end of the day, that's the whole shooting match. That's all we want, right? Is we want to be part of a society where we pay taxes, we work hard, we play by the rules, such that we can be successful, and more importantly, our kids can be more successful than us.
Was that the most distressing chart for you? Because these charts are like a tour of doom, right? And we like to say, I just want to live in a country, I want to create a world where my kids get to live in a better, smarter, stronger place. That chart, was that the toughest reality for you to look at?
No, I think the most upsetting chart is one that gets a lot of attention for the wrong reasons, and that is the Pew did a study on young adults, And when you're walking down the avenue that is America, 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 haven't had sex in the last year. And you hear the term sex in your brain and your neurons.
With another person? Because porn has never been bigger.
Well, that's an entirely different talk show, and I would acknowledge we're in the midst of the greatest unsupervised experiment on young men in history, and that is porn. And I would
they're
argue,
having sex, it's just not with anyone else.
and I would argue that it not only creates unreasonable expectations around a relationship with a woman, but it decreases their mojo to go out and develop the skills to actually have their own physical intimate encounters. But going back to the fact that so many few men are establishing relationships, sex is a key component of establishing what is the elemental foundation of any society, and that is a long-term loving relationship. And we are producing too many young men who aren't attaching to school, they're not attaching to work, and they're not attaching to romantic partners. The most dangerous person in the world, Stephanie, is a young, broke, and alone male, and we are producing way too many of them. And the fact that half of kids under the age of 18 or only 50% of kids who are not seeing their friends every day, or it's been cut in half. The fact that in the next 5 years, there's going to be 2 female graduates of college for every 1 male graduate. And something we don't acknowledge on the left is that women aren't interested in mating with men who aren't economically viable.
But why do we hate those women? Because when it was reversed, when it was more men graduating from college, you didn't see women lining up to hate them. And now those young men look at those women, those successful women, and they look at them with anger, with fury. Explain this one to me.
So you're absolutely right. And when these men get isolated, they are more prone to misogynistic content. They're less likely to believe in climate change. They're more prone to the conspiracy theory. The guy who attacked Salman Rushdie, that wasn't about a fatwa. That was about a young man living in his mother's basement. So what I would argue, though, and I get pushback from feminists on this, that I want to be clear, no one has an obligation to service men who aren't having sex. When I was in college, the majority of my friends were having sex with other men. What I would say, though, is unless we make an investment in young people such that they're economically viable and they can establish relationships, and part of that is discipline around not watching a lot of porn, getting a job, going to school, taking responsibility for your own life. But without a viable class of young men who are doing well, no group has fallen further faster in our nation than young men.
Do you think this divisiveness, this isolation is worse than it's ever been before? Or do you think it's just on display because social media magnifies it?
Well, it's not just social media. It is worse. I mean, another disturbing chart. 54% of Democrats are worried that their child is going to marry a Republican. A third of each party.
That's absurd.
A third of each party sees the other party as the mortal enemy. There's a great photographer colorizing World War II photos, and there's this wonderful photo of these young men getting off a landing craft, going onto Omaha Beach in the invasion of Normandy. 2 out of 3 would make it off that beach. Average age 26. Average salary, inflation-adjusted basis, $800. I can't imagine any of them looked left or right and knew that he was a Republican or a Democrat. We are geopolitically probably stronger than we've ever been. We're food independent. We're energy independent. The brightest people in the world want to come here. There's more people becoming billionaires. And then when they become billionaires, they decide to turn their company into a nonprofit focused on climate change. The CEO of Patagonia just decided. We have never been stronger relative to other nations.
Then are we just capitalizing on and monetizing the divisions? Because you just listed a whole bunch of extraordinary things and left out just common decency and neighborly behavior, which we're also exhibiting every day.
But where I was headed was the problem is the call is coming from inside of the house. We're eating each other internally. We've decided that we are each other's enemies. And I say to young men, you've got to separate the person from the politics. And something we forget, and that I think is a truth, is that Americans' greatest allies will always be other Americans. We need some sort of social service that puts people in the company of other Americans, not against people in other political parties.
Okay, well, then that takes me to the chart that stood out to me.
Yep.
The one on immigrants. Okay, in 2018, more than half of our unicorn companies here, right, billion-dollar-plus private companies were founded or co-founded by immigrants. Yet, we don't even have immigration policy in this country. How do you square that?
Oh, we shouldn't. Look,
we hate our newest, greatest asset?
If the Tampa Bay Buccaneers every year had the top draft choices across the entire college environment, and they decided, no, we don't want the top. We get the #1 draft choice from every nation in the world every year, and we've decided that we don't want that.
Why?
I don't entirely understand. I think we've politicized and demonized immigrants. And if you look at immigrants in our society, they're much more likely to move up the income ladder. It's very difficult, whether it's MasterCard or Google or Microsoft, you're talking about immigrants. A third of the NASDAQ is run by first-generation immigrants. So that's the secret sauce. And to turn away #1 draft choices every year just seems insane to me. It makes absolutely no sense.
So why did you write this book? Because you write about American exceptionalism, which you celebrate, which you believe in, but you're down on the American dream. So what are you trying to tell us?
Well, to use an old Bill Clinton adage, I don't think there's anything wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with it. We have huge problems, but you have to diagnose the disease and not go after the tumor, go after the disease. So we need to identify the young men are failing, that polarization is tearing us apart, that this massive income inequality is not only unjustified, but all of these things can be fixed. Big tech likes to pretend that, oh, the internet is just a mirror of the world, that these problems are complex, and yet we take one account down from Twitter and 30 to 60% of election information, misinformation goes away. We can absolutely solve these problems. The middle class is an accident of World War II, and it requires investment. But when we make these forward-leaning investments, when we have R&D as a function of infrastructure investment, we're spending about 1/10 of what China is. When we put men and women into space, when we decide to research vaccines, when we put GPS satellites into the air, we have amazing companies that develop. But we can't have the CEOs of EV companies constantly criticizing government and saying government just needs to get out of the way. Did he want us to get out of the way when we gave him a $450 million loan? Is he against all the charging stations that middle-class taxpayers are going to pay for?
No, sir.
So
we're talking about you, Elon Musk.
Who are the most loyal Americans? Who are the most patriotic? The one who have invested the most? Veterans? Who are the ones most apt to criticize the greatest organization, the most noble organization in history of the U.S. government? Are most fortunate, and that is young tech billionaires. It's time we stopped, quite frankly, S-posting government and realize that we are here, the prosperity we are here, the connective tissue, the thing that connects you and me is this wonderful thing called U.S. government. It's us, and it's been the most successful investor. It's turned back fascism. It's fed the poor. 50% of donations globally come from U.S. philanthropy. And it's time that we said, okay, we're Americans, and let's show some affinity and some goodwill for our connective tissue and our institutions, and that is the good people in the U.S. government.
The thing that connects you and me is friendship. We are real friends.
Thank you for saying that.
You devoted this book, you dedicated this book to your cousin Andrew, who died of COVID complications.
Yep.
Why did you do that?
You know, that's hard. It's Andrew, thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't expecting that. My cousin was this tall, strapping, handsome kid.
But strapping and handsome.
All that, yeah. Me, but much more charming and good looking. And he made some terrible decisions. He decided not to get vaccinated. And through a series of unfortunate accidents, I could have created a list of all of my family members who were most susceptible to COVID, and he would be at the bottom of the list. But a series of bad decisions, and he ended up on a ventilator and crashed and died at the age of 52 and left a 9-year-old boy an orphan.
Why didn't he get vaccinated?
A series of bad decisions, but also I think the polarization and politicization of our media that gives young people and a lot of us the excuse to think there's both sidism around science. I think a lot of Americans made terrible decisions, and a lot of people unnecessarily died because of the politicization of everything and the bad feelings we have towards each other and politicizing science and the truth. And until we have a truth again, it used to be the Republicans and Democrats came together around this thing called science. We said, okay, this is what the data says, this is what the science says. And now we've politicized science around our political leanings. And I think it's cost us dearly, including the lives of a bunch of people. So yeah, anyways, devoted to Andrew Levine.
Well, tomorrow is a new day, and Democrats and Republicans can get together there.
There you go. I hope so. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Scott Galloway, again, his new book, Adrift, America in 100 Charts. Take it from me. You need to read it.